What if I told you that the most relaxing trip into the woods, the sound of crackling fire, the stars shining overhead, the feeling of being far away from the chaos of the city has, for some campers, ended in absolute terror? Because while camping brings us closer to nature, it also strips away walls, locks, and the comforts of safety. Out there, under a thin nylon tent, you are more vulnerable than you've ever been. Tonight, we're diving into 4 real-life camping stories that ended not in peace, but in fear. And as you listen, ask yourself one question. If this happened to me, would I even make it back home? Story 1. The footsteps in the dark. It began like any normal weekend adventure. 4 college friends decided to camp deep in the Appalachian Mountains, far from the nearest road. They hiked for hours, set up their tents by a stream, and toasted marshmallows under a star-filled sky. Everything felt perfect. But sometime past midnight, one of them woke up to the sound of footsteps. Not the light scurrying of an animal, but slow, heavy, deliberate steps, circling their tent. At first, he thought it must have been another hiker passing through. But the steps didn't continue down the trail. They stayed right there, pacing around them in a slow, deliberate loop. He whispered to his friend beside him, who also strained to listen. Now, 2 of them were wide awake, frozen. Finally, one of the guys called out, "Hey, who's out there?" Silence. Then the footsteps stopped. The group held their breath. A few seconds passed, then suddenly, the sound of running. Something sprinted into the woods. By sunrise, they tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe a prank. But when they stepped outside, their laughter ended. Surrounding their camp were boot prints. Dozens of them. Not just from one direction, but circling, closing in. Like whoever had been there wanted to get as close as possible without being seen. And none of those boot prints matched the shoes any of them were wearing. So, who was it? A lost wanderer? A hunter? Or someone who had been watching them all night, just waiting for the right moment to come closer? Story 2. The Stranger in the Water. The second story takes us to a remote lake in Canada. A father and his 12-year-old son decided to spend the weekend fishing. They paddled out to a tiny island, set up camp, and cooked their catch over the fire. The night was peaceful until about 2 in the morning. The boy woke first. He heard splashing loud, heavy splashes, as if something was moving through the water. At first, he thought it might have been a beaver, but when he nudged his father awake, they both peered out toward the water, and that's when they froze. There, about 20 feet from shore, stood a figure, not swimming, not flailing, standing, waist deep in the water, completely still, facing the camp. The moonlight reflected off its silhouette. The father grabbed a flashlight, hands trembling, and shined it toward the lake. But the second the light hit, the figure lowered itself into the water, gone without a sound. They didn't wait. In total silence, they packed only what they could grab in a rush, pushed their canoe into the water, and paddled with everything they had. The father would later tell people it felt like they were being followed, like the water rippled behind them the entire time. And here's the part that really chills me. The next day, they reported it to a park ranger. But instead of being surprised, the ranger just went quiet and said, "Yeah, people have seen things in that lake before. Best not to camp there again." Story 3. The Man in the Cavoir. Third story is straight out of a nightmare. 2 friends were backpacking through Utah, where the desert nights can get brutally cold. To shield themselves from the wind, they decided to sleep inside a shallow cave. At first, it seemed like the perfect plan. They spread out their sleeping bags, joked about how they were like cavemen, and eventually drifted off. But some time after midnight, one of them woke to a sound, scraping, like fingernails dragging across stone. He listened, frozen, as it grew louder. Then he heard something worse, breathing. Slow, ragged breathing echoing from the deeper part of the cave. He nudged his friend awake. Together, they turned on a flashlight and aimed it into the darkness. What they saw still haunts them to this day. A man, gaunt, filthy, with long tangled hair, was crouched on all fours. His eyes caught the beam of the flashlight, glowing for a split second. And then he smiled. That was all they needed. They grabbed their bags and bolted out of the cave, sprinting into the freezing night with no direction, not even caring about their supplies. The next day, they returned with local authorities. But the cave was empty. No trace of the man, so who or what was he? A drifter, a hermit, or something else entirely, hiding just beyond the edge of the light? Story 4. The collapsing tent-hour final story comes from Yosemite National Park. A young couple, Sarah and Matt, were camping on their first trip together. The day was picture-perfect hiking, waterfalls, laughter. That night, they fell asleep in their tent, tired but happy. Around 3 a.m., Sarah woke up. Matt was sitting upright, eyes wide, his body rigid with fear. She whispered, "What's wrong?" And he replied in a voice that chilled her to the bone, "There's someone in the tent with us." Sarah didn't move. She didn't even breathe. She scanned the dark interior, but all she could see were shadows. For a few seconds, nothing happened. And then suddenly, the tent began to collapse inward, as if something or someone was pressing down from the outside. Matt fumbled for his pocket knife, slashed the tent open, and they bolted into the woods. Barefoot, terrified, they ran until sunrise. When they returned with rangers, they found the tent shredded with deep, jagged tears. But here's the detail that makes this story even stranger. There were claw marks all across the fabric, and yet no animal tracks. Nothing in the dirt. Just silence.